Today we're making a traditional Togolese drink. Before I proceed, can you guess in the comment section what this drink is called? Now let's get started. Hi, my name is Jijo Klake. You can find me on social media as Adventures of a Ghanaian Girl. Today we are here to learn about making Solom. Solom is a drink that is indigenous to the northern Togolese people, more specifically Dufale. And just a bit of history about myself. I am second generation Ghanaian. That means that my grandparents migrated from Togo to Ghana many years ago. And legend actually has it that my mom sold this exact drink to pay for her education. This is actually her grandparents' spot, which is now being run by my auntie. So today we're going to spend a bit of time learning about the process of making Solom. It's a very nice drink. The main ingredients are millet and corn and a lot of water. We're actually going to walk you through the entire process. Happening here is that this corn is being soaked in water. It will be totally submerged in water. I observed that the corn soaks so much water that it increases the surface area in the container. The millet, on the other hand, remains pretty much the same. So once it's soaked, after 12 hours, it is drained using this basket and net technique that you see here. And so once the water from the corn is drained, it is then put back in the container and allowed to sit for a period of 24 hours. The water that you see is wastewater and it's going to be disposed of. The same thing is done to the millet as well. So it's going to sit for 24 hours and you're going to see that it's going to start to sprout. So as you look at it here, the corn has started to sprout. It is not that obvious. So this is the millet. It was soaked yesterday evening and it was taken out of the water. If you look at it closely, some of them have started to I need this to get in focus. Some of them have started to sprout. Yes, some have started to sprout. Up next, what you're seeing here is that the millet is being rinsed. The millet and corn are going to be rinsed, and for this part of the process, everything is being done separately. The millet is worked on separately, the corn is worked on separately. So what you see happening here is that the millet is being rinsed. It is not washed, it is rinsed. We only rinse it because we do not want to bruise it. Then it is drained as you saw earlier, and using the basket and the net. And after it is drained, it is separated into smaller fractions into smaller different containers. And the reason for the small fractions is so that it is properly aerated, so that it will germinate properly. This is done to the millet first, and then the corn is also going to undergo the same process. It's being separated into different containers into smaller fractions. And the next step is the corn. The corn is also going to be rinsed. It will then be drained using the basket and the net technique. And what you see happening here is that a calabash is being used to scoop the maize from the container into the basket. And once it drains, it is also separated into smaller fractions, different containers into smaller fractions, and allowed to sit for a period of 3 days, 4 days. It really depends on how much germination that you see as the days progress, and each individual and their recipe. So here we have it. As you can see, the corn right now has germinated, and you can see the little sprouts in my hand. The millet has also germinated, and when you taste this, it's actually very sweet. So you see the millet here is fully germinated. You can see the sprouts at the bottom. They are very white, and so they're gonna be detangled. So that's all millet that has sprouted. So she's going through the process of detangling the millet. The reason it is detangled is so that it would aid in the process of milling. If it's not detangled, it will not pass through the corn mill quickly. It may clog the mill. Now it is stored because because it's going to be milled the next day. And as you can see, she's compressing it. The reason she's compressing it is so that air will not pass through this millet. Earlier on you saw that we separated it so that air will pass through, but here we do not want air to pass through, because if air passes through it produces a pungent smell. Almost 5 a.m. and we are out here grinding the millet for the Solom process. So they typically start very early. They started around 4:30, and from last night they separated the millet because part of it had grown into little shoots, sort of. So today they are grinding it to commence the cooking process. So it's going to be a whole day actually. And so the first step is to grind it so that it becomes fine, not too fine, but just fine enough for them to cook and to be able to sieve it. So that's what you see going on. What you see here is the millet. Again, at this point it's still being separated. Everything is treated separately. The corn is treated separately from the millet. So right now we're grinding the millet in the mill. And so the lady's hand is in there because she's pushing the millet through the mill so that the gentleman can grind it. And it's not too fine. It's fine enough, but not as fine as it could be. So first we grind the millet and then we move on to the corn. And like I said earlier, everything is still very much being done separately. The millet and the corn are totally being treated separately. So here the corn is being grinded, or the after the milling is done, the end product is allowed to sit for a while. The end product is typically very hot, and so it's allowed to sit for a while so it will cool down. After it has cooled down, then the cooking process will commence. So what you see happening here is that she's mixing the millet powder and then the corn powder together, which will then be put in some water, and then it will be mixed to form a mixture. The ratio here is about 3:1. 3 parts millet and 1 part corn. So here she's fetching the millet and the corn. The ratio is approximately 3:1. It is then mixed with a large volume of water and then mashed to form a mixture. So at this point, the millet and the corn are treated together. Initially, I mentioned that they're treated separately, but here everything is being done together. So here we're going to dump it into the container of water. And all these containers that you see here are going to be used in the cooking process, in addition to some of the pots that you see soon. Here I'm using a calabash to assist in the mashing. Some of the particles get settled at the bottom, and I find that the calabash was actually very useful because you sort of mix it in the bowl in the calabash and then you mix it with the lot. And because the bowl is so deep, if I wanted to use just my hand, it would be very difficult. That would mean I would have to submerge a good portion of my hand into the bowl. So once the mixing is done, this is the end product. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of water that is utilized. This is it. And you see that there's a lot of foam on the mixture. We're going to take off the foam from this mixture. And the reason we do that is because we utilize the process of separation a lot in the making of Solom. And if the foam is allowed to sit, you will not be able to see the separation occur. So it's important to remove the foam from the top so that you can see the separation as it happens. So we'll remove the foam from all the mixtures that we have prepared today. And this will be used again later. It will be cooked with the first batch of Solom, but in the interim, we'll have to remove it. So this is the chaff that was collected from the top. So as you can see here, there's some separation going on. But while we wait, we're going to start putting together the things we need to start the fire. So we utilize calabash a lot in this process. That's actually how we drink the solom. But you see that there's a bit of separation. It might not be so obvious to you until I get to the bottom, but the top component of the solom is very thin, it's very light. And when I get to the bottom, it's very thick because some of the particles have settled at the bottom. And that is what we are actually going to cook the first time, in addition to the foam that we collected earlier. So you see me collecting the top layer, and I'll collect it until I get to a point where I feel like I have hit the thick bottom layer. And there are so many containers with the same process occurring. So the big blue container you see here is going to undergo the same process. So right now I'm stirring it, and you see this is the bottom. You see the color is different. It's much thicker than the top that I just fetched. You see how thick that is? And this is it. We're going to collect all of them and put them all in these two pots and allow it to cook. At this point, we've added the foam that we collected earlier. So we're cooking the thick settled bottom and then the foam at this point. So this is what it looks like. It's pretty thick. And this is the branch. This is actually a tree branch. We used to stir it. And at this point, we're going to start making the fire. We utilize firewood and then the mesocarp. That's the fibrous husk of the coconut, the palm kernel shells, and then the palm kernel fiber as well. So what she's going to light up right now is the palm kernel fiber. And of course, firewood, as you see. And well, in a minute, we're going to have the fire. So voila. The fire has been set. Yes, and we're ready to go. So we're gonna cook this thick portion. I've been told to tie my head because of the smoke from the fire. So I've tied my head because of the smoke, so that I don't get the scent of the smoke in my hair and also the particles. Yep. So that's it. Check me out. So the day, I guess, is really about to begin at this point. It's literally about 6:30, and what's being done here is that the fire is being quenched. At this point, I guess the fire is really strong, so it's being quenched with water. And you can see this is really thick. It looks like some kind of porridge. And we're gonna allow it to cook for a while. I think it was on fire for about an hour. And as it sits, we're gonna beat it and stir it with the branches that you see so that it doesn't overflow. When the fire is too strong, it tends to want to overflow. So at certain times we quench the fire, at certain times we dilute it with water, and at certain times you just beat it until it sort of subsides. Here she's fetching the first batch, and she's going to mix it with the upper portion that we fetched earlier a little bit. And this one is facing the sun. The reason why they're doing this is so that it ferments. So this one is going to face the sun, and this will aid in the fermentation process. We're going to move forward to actually fetching the remainder of the thick portion. We're going to mix it with the upper portion. So this one is a 50-50 ratio, a ratio of the thick to the lighter portion. And as you can see, this requires a bit of teamwork. It's a lot of back and forth, a lot of communication and collaboration. So once this is done, it's going to be stirred. So we'll stir it for a few minutes to allow it to mix properly. And once it mixes sufficiently, it's then going to be covered. You notice that the first one wasn't covered, but this is going to be covered. The sunlight, for some reason, facilitates fermentation. Because we do not want this to ferment, we're going to cover it and then proceed to the next step. What it looks like after it's been covered for a while. You notice that it's a deep red color, and we're going to go ahead and fetch the Solom mixed with the top. Yeah, look at the color. It's so red. So what I'm doing here is that I'm fetching the top layer after it has cooled down a bit, and then we're going to sieve the bottom layer. So I'm going to spend some time fetching it until we get to the point where I feel I'm at the point where I'm meeting the thick component, and at that point then I'll have to stop. So you realize that separation is a very crucial component of the Solom preparation process. After fetching the top, you see the bottom is still boiling. So you get a very good view of this. The bottom is going to continue to boil after I have fetched the top component. And like I said earlier, this is ongoing for most containers over there. So it's a continuous process. So as you can see here, the bottom is still boiling. And here we're going to sieve the remainder of the bottom, the thick component. So the reason we sieve at this point is that this sieve has a very small pore size. That means much more of the liquid is able to pass through, and then solid is collected and repurposed. I'm not going to go through the entire process of repurposing the solid. I will just take you through a little bit of it because it is not part of what we are trying to accomplish today. But once it's done, you see it's separated into smaller fractions. This is supposed to facilitate its cooling. So it's going to be separated in this fashion and allowed to cool. I thought this was interesting because we're going to put it back on fire again. So I was wondering why they needed to let it cool, but that's the process. I didn't really get a reason for it. So this is the thick component that was sieved. And it's going to, in this case, they're going to use the basket and net technique because this is larger pores and they need more of the liquid to pass through it. Being sieved using the basket and net, and it will be used for another type of Solom, one which is sold in the market but doesn't have the lasting taste that you see in the Solom that we're currently preparing. The lady you see here, so here the lady actually asked her if she would rinse it or if I needed to rinse it, and she said to go ahead and rinse. So she gave me some of the Solom, and then I'm going to rinse it and then pour it out into the net. This will be used later, but not for the purposes of preparing this Solom. So the lady you see here in yellow is Ekuya. She helps my aunt out, and we'll be talking to her later. She's gonna walk us through the Solom making process. But right now, she's sieving the Solom like you saw earlier, and she's going to pour it into the pot so that it will cook. So she's still sieving, as you can see. We have different sizes of calabash. There are some very big ones and some very small ones. So she's pouring it in there, and this is going to cook for a while. What you see happening in here is that the fire is pretty strong, so they are using water to quench it. Yes. So water is being used to quench the fire. And you see that parts of the fire is covered. That's just to prevent the fire from getting out of hand, because it's being stirred by human beings, and if it comes out that way, it might hurt whoever is stirring. So they cover it in an effort to aid the individual who is going to stir it, so that they don't have to come in contact with the fire. So this has literally been a week's worth of activities. So right now, this is literally the end of the preparation, the Solom preparation process. It's going to boil for a very long time, over an hour, maybe 2 hours. It's going to continue to boil like this. I liken this boil, or this, what you see here, to an ocean wave or a tide. And it needs to be beaten so that it doesn't spill into the fire, it doesn't spill over. And that's essentially this process for making Solom. It literally took us about a whole day. I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's 12 hours. It's definitely not 12 hours, maybe 10 hours. But it's definitely been a whole day's activities. And remember earlier, the soaking of the millet and the corn, and then leaving it to sit for like 4 days. So literally the entire process is a week, because the Solom is prepared every week. She prepares it every Thursday. It's done now, so we are going to transfer it from the pot to the storage bins, and we'll store it until it's ready to be sold. So after almost 12 hours of doing this, we're finally done. This has literally been a week's worth of activities. She's again using water to quench the fire after removing most of the firewood. So now it's ready. It's ready to be collected. She's asking me if I want to collect it, and I told her no. I don't want to get burned. Yeah, but it's ready to be collected. Obviously, I'm collecting it now. And it's gonna be stored for sales. The cooking and the storage really affects the fermentation process. So if the Solom isn't properly cooked, it will ferment very quickly. In her case, her Solom can be stored for a period of 1 month before it starts to ferment, barring any outside interference. Now, according to her, if she stores it and somebody comes to like knock it over and it gets agitated, it will ferment. So it needs a quiet, no interruption kind of environment, like no disturbance at all. We are done.
Yes.
We're finished. This is my share. It's been allowed to cool, and so she's fetching this for me to take home. I really enjoyed this, and I consume this literally every time I'm at home.
Place sube kaka wona kela achi aha yana mi la jere chala akwabe na le je kakala ba kwabe na chila poleke futu pola ekeja kaka na chi kakala maga kpo fude keleta do ka ba no light maga kpo ne kota na le jere kakala eje na waje na ga ba ku vito na ba ko misi apa akwabe futu pa aga jabava kaka na me miso eleje bela na mo le no kra o maga setes de ko aha da abeleke fule ke tamela nega chiwe kela maga kpo fude kele eta
ayo akpelo. This is fermented. this is fermented, so it actually has a bit of a kick to it. The sweet one is not fermented, so it is actually very sweet, and I think the sweetness is derived from when the corn and the millet start to germinate. When you actually taste it, it has a very sweet taste. Like the little sprouts has a very, very sweet taste, and I think that's where the sweetness comes from. This one is a bit matured, so it has a bit of a kick. Next time I'll try to record the alcohol, like actually quantify the alcohol content. I'm almost done. I'm done. I'm definitely a little bit more fresh, more tipsy. I'm gonna go home now. Thanks for watching. It's been fun. Please subscribe. You will really enjoy this content. It's a lot of traditional African stuff, and I think you'll have a lot of fun on this page. Please comment. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions about the process, let me know.